Hello and welcome to Was It Good, the most unserious, serious literary podcast on the internet. My name is Sid.
And my name is Rowan.
And we're two silly geese.
At our day jobs, we study literature professionally as PhD students.
Join us in the pond as we use our decade of serious schooling to give you the silliest rundown on literary adaptations.
Ever wondered what the best version of Pride and Prejudice is? Want to sound well-read at your next dinner party?
We're here to help as the premier goose-themed literary podcast with only correct takes.
You'll never be left wondering, was it good? Well, hi Sid.
Hi, Rowan.
Are you excited to be recording our first ever podcast episode?
Yeah, I'm really excited. This has been in the works for a long time. We've really been talking about it for a long time, and it was really one of those things where I'm proud of us for actually doing it, because I feel like we talked about it so much that I was worried we would just talk about it forever. And that was mostly my fault, you see, because I would be like, I'm really tired and I don't want to record right now.
But we went to Best Buy, we got microphones.
And that really set the wheels in motion.
We downloaded podcast editing software, which I will not say the name of because they are not sponsoring us yet. Slide in the DMs.
Yeah, if you think it's you. Then you can reach out to us. I don't know. Okay, so let's go over how the show's going to work. Otherwise, what we're going to be calling pond parameters, because every pond needs parameters.
Yes, or else it becomes a larger body of water.
Yeah, that's what makes a pond, is the parameters.
Exactly.
Famously.
So we'll start with Context Corner, a segment where we give brief summaries of each main text that we will discuss.
There will be spoilers, so if you're not familiar with either text, we recommend that you familiarize yourself, or just come along for the ride knowing that the text will be spoiled for you.
Next, we'll move on to discuss What Changed, a segment where we consider how the adaptation differs from the original text.
And then we'll follow that up with the complementary segment called What's the Same, where we consider what was preserved about the original text in the adaptation process.
And finally, we're going to be giving our personal honk ratings,
trademark pending,
on each text, deciding at the end, obviously, was it good? The reason why we're doing a honk rating is because we are silly geese and you are all in the pond. And geese say honk. We did Google it. We had to make sure. We were like, what noise does a goose make? And it was honk.
Yeah, universally agreed upon, in fact, that geese honk.
So, we're not just getting book facts, we're also getting bird facts.
Yeah, this is actually a place of learning. So you will learn alongside us what various noises animals make and also what makes a good adaptation.
Exactly. So for our first ever episode, we are considering two texts that are very close to our collective heart in honor of the recently passed spooky season.
R.I.P. We really did intend to have this episode out on Halloween, but academics are rarely on time with things. So we're really actually just being truthful to our profession.
Yeah, we're actually just showing you a glimpse behind the curtain of university life. But we are doing The
Haunting of Hill House,
Shirley Jackson's 1959 novel and Mike Flanagan's 2018 miniseries. So for those of us who are just raring to jump into the pond and splash around,
let's get right into Context Corner. Okay, I will start with The Haunting of Hill House, the 1959 Gothic novel by Shirley Jackson. It's a critically acclaimed novel, widely considered to be one of the best classic ghost stories ever written. The novel follows the story of Eleanor Vance, recently liberated from the role of her mother's caretaker after her mother's death, who was invited to spend a summer at the titular Hill House by Dr. Montague, a supposed sociologist seeking supernaturally inclined assistance for his investigation of Hill House as a haunted house.
Real question is, Sid, would you go?
I think I would go. Okay, so I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I think I'd be too interested to say no. And I love summer camp.
It is a little bit summer camp vibes. I think at first I was like, there's no way in hell I would go. But to be honest, I am a people pleaser. And if someone wrote and was like, Rowan, we need you specifically, I'd for sure have to go. I'd drop everything. But to return to the novel, how does Eleanor feel?
Eleanor is delighted by the prospect of a summer away from her horrible family and gladly accepts. When she arrives, she meets Theodora, a beautiful bohemian artist, and Luke, the indolent, sticky-fingered heir to the house itself. Eleanor, Theodora, Luke, and Dr. Montague experience ghostly phenomena of varying intensities, forming a rapid trauma bond. But Eleanor, whom the others call Nell, and Theodora seem to be at the center of disturbances. Things come to a head when Dr. Montague's wife, Mrs. Montague, arrives with her quote-unquote friend, Arthur, to join their investigation.
Okay, so I just want to, limb something out with you right now. Mrs. Montague and Arthur.
They're fucking.
Yeah, they are banging boots.
Yeah, the famous colloquialism, banging booth.
Listen, Dr. Montague, he's a cuck.
He's a cuck, and we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But
what happens to Mrs. Montague and Arthur, though?
Not much.
Okay.
Neither Mrs. Montague nor Arthur experience anything supernatural. Their intrusion into the house prompts the steadily more unstable Nell to attempt suicide. This causes the others to send her home, but Nell, now fully under the impression that Hill House needs her there, refuses to leave, resulting in her demise. The novel ends with the ghoulish gang disbanding and no further confirmation of what exactly happened at Hill House.
Really sad. I guess not a reboot, a pre-boot of the Scooby Gang.
Pre-boot of the Scooby Gang. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of giving Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but everyone is really depressed and a little insane.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's also the plot of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
But I will say they're a lot more anxious about if women can wear pants or not.
That's
in the
true.
Novel.
Yeah, there's not a single plunging neckline nor choker necklace to be seen.
And those are staples of Buffy and Friends.
I didn't hear mention of a single butterfly clip. So.
And they're back now.
And they are back. But they were not back in the 50s. They hadn't started yet.
No. Okay. So our other text, our adaptation text, is The Haunting of Hill House 2018 miniseries by Mike Flanagan, which we will refer to hereafter as The House. This series follows the Crane family, consisting of young parents Olivia and Hugh and their 5 children, Stephen, Shirley, Theodora, called Theo by her family, and a pair of twins, Eleanor, also called Nell or Nellie, and Luke. Olivia and Hugh are house flippers. She is an architect, and he is some kind of unspecified, general, fixie, renovation-y.
He's a dad.
Yeah, he does dad stuff. He nails and hammers and such.
And he puts his hands on his hips and just like kind of looks at stuff and goes, "Hello." And I don't know if there's anything more dad coded than that.
No, universal cross culture.
Mm-hmm.
But Olivia and Hugh buy Hill House as a perspective flip, moving their whole family into the house for what is meant to be one summer in the 90s, probably with butterfly clips, although this is not confirmed in canon.
Yeah, I don't think I saw a butterfly clip, but I think that, it's implied that there could be butterfly. They exist in this universe for sure.
Whereas Nellie in the book never heard of a butterfly clip.
No, not once.
Never stepped on one and experienced possibly the worst pain of all time.
No, that's reserved for stepping on Lego.
I feel like the clip's worse because when it splinters.
Yeah, but it does have that give. Lego
That's true.
doesn't.
Yeah.
So I think
Second worst pain.
Okay, so one summer in the 90s.
Sorry, the horrors prevail. The family, in fact, never truly leaves Hill House. The show covers 2 timelines, one in roughly 2018, in which the adult children and Hugh navigate the after effects of their residency at Hill House, and the other depicting that fateful summer. Beginning in present day with the adult Nell's death by apparent suicide, the rest of the show slowly reveals the circumstances behind this death and the sinister nature of Hill House. In this twisted, Flanagan version of Property Spouses, the stakes of the flip are life and death.
And it really, the overall message really does seem to be, don't be a house flipper.
And, you grow to love the Crane family in all their rights and all their wrongs, but this was their original sin.
Yeah.
Being a house flipper.
Don't do it.
Making money off of, the capitalist trade of land and property.
Yeah.
You know what? Here at Was It Good, we do not endorse.
No, and to be honest, okay, so I don't think Olivia would have gone for like millennial gray, and I realize this is the 90s, so I realize this is an anachronism. However, I think Hugh Crane would have gone for millennial gray.
I think he would have done farmhouse cabinets for a refrigerator door.
Ooh.
Like, when you can't tell which one's the fridge and which one's the pantry.
Yeah, and they'd be distressed.
Yeah. Based on the fact that she calls bookcases case goods, a term I had to Google. I was like, what's a case good? And it's just a piece of furniture that holds other things inside of it.
I didn't know that.
I also didn't know that. I was like, what does that mean?
And
what is she saying?
We're lifelong learners over here.
And we are. Get in the pond.
Honk honk.
Honk. And I've always said that. Honk, motherfucking honk.
It's true. They have always said that.
Okay. So our next segment, we're going to be discussing the changes that happen between these two texts. And some are already very evident. For instance, the time period has a huge shift from the 50s to the late 90s and 2010s in the dual timelined Flanahouse.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because, the novel takes place over what we come to realize is only about a week.
A crazy week.
One crazy week. Whereas the Flanahouse, it's not really explicit how long they're actually in the house for before all the stuff happens. It looks to be longer than a week.
To the tune of months, I think.
Mm-hmm.
At least around 4 weeks, because they mention, Hugh mentions at the end of the show that they were only supposed to be there for 8 weeks, so he wouldn't have built a treehouse, etc., etc. So I think that they didn't manage to fulfill their entire tenancy at Hill House, but probably, definitely more than half. They did so much fixing stuff.
Yeah, it seemed to me like they spent more time than a week in the house, for sure.
Definitely more than a week.
Definitely more than a week. So we have 1 week in the 50s, or 1 week in Shirley Jackson's novel, which takes place in the 50s. And then we have, potentially close to a summer in the Flanahouse. And then we see the ramifications of the events of that summer follow the Cranes throughout the subsequent decades.
And you always have to think about the Rammies.
You always got to think about the Rammies. And I think that's also the thing that Hugh and Olivia, they did not consider the Rammies.
No, they went in there Rammy blind. But anyway, one of the benefits of the time period shift in the show includes a change to the role of women in the novel, because women are the center of the hauntings in both texts. In Shirley Jackson's original novel, things are very much centered around Nell and Theo to a lesser extent, and in the show, Nell is also very much the center of the family, and Olivia is the one who actually kicks off the horrors that precipitate them actually leaving Hill House.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the shift in the time period, we have women characters who are just a lot more sure of their ability to inhabit a space outside of the domestic sphere. Nell, in particular, due to both her unique kind of traumatic background and her personality that's just a little bit more timid in general, she's very unsure about if she's allowed to exist in a space for herself rather than in service of others.
Nell in the novel.
Nell in the novel.
Yeah.
She's very uncertain about that. She doesn't even know if she can wear pants.
Yeah, and that's, a real crisis that she goes through. She packs them but never puts them on.
And, we do have to remember that this is a time period where women couldn't even have credit cards, couldn't have bank accounts.
Couldn't own property.
Yeah, it was definitely...
Could they own property? No. Not without permission, I think. They had to have like a male cosigner to own property.
I'm not as familiar with the way that laws developed in the 50s in America, but I wouldn't question it if that was right. That sounds right. But, hey, sound off in the comments.
Yeah, drop a little credit card emoji if women could own property in the 50s by themselves, I guess.
But for sure, credit was not available.
Credit was not available to them.
That is a huge... The fact that Olivia is a career woman and a whole partner in their house flipping business, really, and is a driving, really vital force, means that also a lot is sapped out of the family when she dies.
Well, yeah, and even thinking about Olivia's internal struggle, which kind of moves from being this really empowered modern woman to trying so hard to inhabit the domestic and the domestic only. She doesn't want to leave the house by the end, and she wants to keep her children there, and she views herself as only a mother, and that is like the limit of her identity by the end of the show, whereas at the beginning she has a fully realized identity as an architect, and mother is part of that identity, but it's not her only identity. So we see that kind of tension happening in the Flana house, where she kind of regresses in terms of her modern womanhood.
Yeah, and in terms of costuming, which is a brilliant part of that visual media form that is really exciting to see, is in the one flashback that they have from the day they get to the house, Olivia's wearing pants. And she never wears pants again. Well,
she's wearing shorts. It's like those
she's
cool
wearing like
board shorts.
90s mom, very 90s mom cut off shorts, low black tank. She looks slay, of course, but her main presence throughout the show, when the hauntings begin, she's wearing all these flowy kind of pajama sets that are a little bit period. They're a little bit dated. They're very like tailored. They're very beautiful. They're very coordinated. But by the 90s already, that was not as much of a thing. I think that progresses as she kind of becomes more and more entrapped by the house. Her wardrobing does change to reflect more vintage silhouettes. And I'm not talking about vintage as in 90s, okay? The 90s is not vintage.
No, I mean, it is.
Yeah, well, more vintage than the 90s.
More vintage than the 90s. It becomes clear that she's not taking care of herself.
Yeah, and that she goes around barefoot constantly.
Even on broken glass.
And in a house that's undergoing active construction renovation, so it's not exactly the safest environment
to be walking around barefoot.
And I would argue very few environments are safe for that. So the next thing we wanted to talk about was this linear timeline versus a flashback, flash forward kind of structure. In the Flana house, most of the episodes take place as a mix between the past and the future, where the events of the past kind of mirror and refract the events of the future and vice versa.
And occasionally blend together. Because we do see some folks in the past, Nell and Olivia, they both view the past and the future
at the same
time.
Part of that is at the very end, Nell says that Hill House itself, as a supernatural force, warps time. And to my mind, the formal use of flashback and flash forward, analepsis, if you will, does provide a mirror to that concept of Hill House fundamentally being outside of linear time.
That was such a Freudian slip, calling it Hell House.
Oh God, yeah, and I'm not wrong. I hate to say
you're
it.
not wrong. Yeah, it's the whole like it's all confetti scene. Whereas in the novel, it goes forward. It goes forward. The time only marches forward, and that's not to say that we don't get any kind of like time fracturing or time fragmenting, but it's really done primarily through the way that Nell experiences the world around her. So time speeds up and slows down based on her own kind of internal monologues. But we know time still moves forward.
It's slow is what it is in the novel.
Yeah, it seems crazy that they've only been there for a week. Like it seems like they've been there for months.
Because they become so intimate. They become the most important person
to each other.
Much like teen girls who love to make a codependent friendship and then later find out that they were gay all along.
Whoa.
This has happened to
no one in this room.
And that's none of my business. But anyway, they definitely experience so much in such a short period of time. And when it all ends so suddenly at the end of the novel when Nell dies and the Scooby Gang disbands, it's a heartbreaking thing to witness as the reader. Part of the heartbreak is that the most joyous parts of the book, the most enjoyable parts of the book, were the parts where they were hanging out together and getting to know each other and becoming a unit. And to have that, suddenly dissipate over a very short few pages is a tragedy.
There's also this kind of hedonistic element to their relationship where it seems like these afternoons of like kind of not debauchery, but it feels almost debaucherous because they're so almost unfocused in the way that they spend their time that it definitely feels hedonistic. And so we get this stretching out of afternoons and time where it seems like they're spending a lot of time not doing much of anything or not doing much beyond like lazing about or like romping around, which I think is really interesting because it really does paint the kind of image of this glorious summer. And it's really only a few days.
Yeah. And it's actually totally okay to not do much for a few days. But
Yeah.
everyone comments on it when Mrs. Montague comes and Dr. Dr. Montague,
Mr. Cuck.
Mr. Cup, comments that the Scooby Gang tends to take an afternoon nap. She's like shocked because they are very much, and we'll get into this further as well, but they are very much in this post-war American productivity, like Cold War era need to be doing. And instead they consume alcohol, certainly, but the substance they consume the most of is time. Whereas in the Flanaverse house, time really consumes the Crane family.
Yes.
They're constantly unsure of how they've already spent so much time at Hill House, but they still have all these problems. What's going on? Nell, sits right before she returns to the house. She sits for hours in the motel room, not realizing that it's day and night and day and night. They are consumed by time, whereas the Scooby Gang gleefully consumes time.
Yes. The way that time works in both stories is very different and very intentionally different, which kind of brings us into our next point, which is the idea of a frame narrator. So the difference at the linear timeline, this wouldn't work so much, but with the flashback and flash forward, we get Stephen as the kind of frame narrator for the Flanaverse house.
Using the Shirley Jackson's words.
Yes, using the author's, the original text's opening and closing lines. And the difference between the limited series and the novel, we don't really have that frame narrative in the novel, but we do have Dr. Montague as the storyteller as he kind of goes into detail about the original builders of Hill House, the Crane family. So Hugh Crane in the novel builds Hill House in the late 19th century, and then his family is consumed by the expectation of inheritance.
And then in the Flanaverse house, the Crane family are reimagined as the main characters. So rather than as these background characters that are the original house builders, but now because of the fact that they passed on, there's no first-hand account of what actually happened to them. Like in the novel, Dr. Montague is giving a third-hand account of what he heard from someone else who heard, etc., etc.
Yeah, it's the mythology surrounding Hill House versus someone who actually had contact with the original family. So we have, in the Flanaverse house, we have an actual living Crane family that is being impacted by events in front of us. And then we have, in Hill House, the novel, we have the Crane family in the past as kind of more of a mythology.
They don't speak.
No.
They find a book that Hugh Crane wrote that is one of the most horrific passages of the novel, which kind of shows his descent into cruelty and madness and very puritanical religious values for his two daughters.
Yeah, which is so, I mean, it's Shirley Jackson's writing in the New England Gothic style, that is a huge part of the New England Gothic style, is this kind of like puritanical or subverted Christianity. So we've got this kind of perverse version of the Puritans in the original colonies, where, generally the mythos behind the Puritans is this kind of like hardworking, prosperous colony they're the American dream, the original American dream, whatever that means. But then in the New England Gothic, we get a subversion of that. So like the Puritans become this like
Goody Proctor.
Like House of Seven Gables. We've got young Goodman Brown, where his faith drives him insane.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Like these kind of concerns about being perfect drive the main characters crazy. There's a bit of a nod to that in Jackson's novel, where we see Hugh Crane start to lose his mind because of his...
In trying to keep his children safe, he makes this book with these awful, awful illustrations of sin and sinners in hell, and subjects his young children to them, and therefore subjects his young children to this kind of psychological stress.
Yes.
So in trying to keep them safe from the dangers of sin, he in fact injures them, and that is very much what happens to the Crane family in the Flanaverse house as well, but in a different way, in which Olivia's desire to keep her children safe from the outside world transforms into her actively harming the children by trying to poison them with rat poison.
Yeah, one drink.
Just one drink will do ya.
Yeah. And we also see the nod to the New England Gothic in the Flanagan house as well, because we have Hugh and Olivia coming in to take what is previously considered to be empty, unused property, and they're endeavoring to turn it into something quote unquote functional. So something that society can use, whereas previously Hill House has always existed sort of outside of society, outside of the town. And the same with Jackson's novel. Hill House is viewed as this kind of this place that people don't go. They pretend it's not there. And so it's this unproductive area in the town or in relation to the town. And so we see Hugh Crane and Olivia Crane in the Flanagan house attempting to turn this house into something that is productive.
And the house resists.
And the house resists.
And instead consumes them into unproductivity.
Mm-hmm.
And that ties back to what we were talking about earlier, which is the way that the house coaxes the Scooby Gang into a state of indolence so that it can better get them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Flanagan house, we also have the Red Room, which Nell describes as a stomach that puts on different faces so that the Crane family would sit still and be quiet while the house kind of digested them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this kind of fear. The most monstrous thing is something that prevents you from making use of land. And really, that is the heart of the American colonization project.
Mm-hmm.
That's the central fear of that project.
Yeah, and that stems from that goes as far back as the Protestant Reformation. Like that's Elizabeth I calling the Irish weeds in the Garden of England. You know, saying if they're not using the land the way that we would use it, then therefore they don't deserve to own it. And so they brought that interpretation of land to America, quote unquote America, to Turtle Island, and then applied it to the indigenous peoples living there who were living in harmony with the land and knew how to steward that land, and still know because they are still there. But the Protestant, the kind of New England Protestant Puritan ideology is to take whatever is not being used in the way that it would be used in a kind of capitalist, like a proto-capitalist society.
Where productivity is really where work is the main goal.
That's kind of what I mean by proto-capitalist, where it's like that desire to maximize productivity to contribute to the wealth of the state. So in this case, it's not, obviously we don't have the system of capitalism in the sense that like companies or shareholders can reap profit, but the wealth of the nation was dependent on the maximization of land productivity in the colonies.
Yeah. Also, I mean, it directly leads to things like the Hudson Bay Company, the East and West Indies companies. Like those definitely, the soul of capitalism is colonization, and the soul of colonization is capitalism.
Yeah.
They're inextricably intertwined, much like the Crane family in the Flanagan house. Our next point was going to be about how the Crane family being the focus, being these related characters, is a huge change from Shirley Jackson's novel, in which the characters are all strangers to each other who never meet before the events of the novel and never meet again after them.
Yeah, they're together for 1 week and then they separate, and we never know what happens to any of them other than Nell, who passes away. But the Crane family, we do get that closure with them, because in the Flanagan house, they go back to the Hill House and face the house. And they face their experiences there, and then leave ostensibly victorious.
Much more satisfying ending, because instead of breaking apart, they come together. I would also say that just everything is more interwoven. The characters are family instead of strangers, so we don't waste time. Well, not waste, because it's a very beautiful part of the novel, but we don't have to spend time stitching the characters together. And Jackson really doesn't even spend all that much time. The characters get stitched together so fast because of the unique nature of the house. But in the Flanagan house, they're already pre-woven together. They can't be unwoven because they're blood family. The timelines, past, present, and future, can't be dissected from each other because they're all woven together. And similarly, the Dudleys play a much larger role in the Flanagan house. They also appear as the caretakers of the property in Shirley Jackson's novel. But other than knowing that Mrs. Dudley cooks well and isn't very friendly, we don't really get that much more insight.
Yeah, and she clears 10 and she lays the table at 6 and then she gets the hell out of there.
Yeah, she's very on time.
Yeah, she loves time. And another example of the linear timeline, which also is kind of a disruption of time, because for Mrs. Dudley, it's like, you know, the hours that she cooks and does everything, it's the same every day. So even if time marches forward, it's like still very repetitive.
Yeah, but there's a way in which she becomes the clock for the people. They get shocked when breakfast comes, or like she becomes a stabilizing or regulating kind of force.
Yeah.
Until she can regulate no longer because Nella's died.
Yes. And then in the Dudley family in the Flana house links the original owners of the house to the Crane family because they have met both families.
Yeah, so they invented a new family as the original owners of Hill House called the Hill family.
Which does make sense. I mean, it's, you know.
So the Hill House, well, the hill in Hill House in the book is named for the hills surrounding the house, whereas in the show, it is for this family.
The Hills.
And the young Dudleys worked for the old Hill family when they were really dying out at that point. They were, you know, already entering their moribund phase. But then as middle-aged folks, they meet the young Crane family, and then they meet again as aged people. So they connect all three timelines, the Cranes, past and present, and the Hills.
Yeah, so it's rather than a kind of mythologized family or a mythologized original family, we have a kind of more concrete depiction of the original family that inhabited the house because we have that firsthand experience from the Dudleys. We still do get a bit of that sort of mythology with the Hills because they were all insane. And we don't really, it's kind of only told through
Clara.
Through Clara, and it's kind of snippets. She's not bad-mouthing them. She's very reserved. So she's not just like, let me tell you about my old boss. She's like, oh yeah, she was very unwell, or she was clinically crazy. And that was when she was talking about Poppy. But like, she's never like going around saying, I'm going to tell you the whole story. So we only get little details. So we still do get a bit of that mythology, but it's still a more concrete remembrance of the Hills rather than a third-hand account.
No, we hear it from the horse's mouth. And more than that, we see the Hills as ghosts.
Yes.
Unlike in the novel, the past refuses to just be neatly folded away in a third-hand story from Dr. Cuck. They remain present, and they insert themselves and their pastness into the Crane family's present.
Do we think that the ghosts are real?
I think that this is a great place for us to drop some terminology, which we will also be doing periodically because we're all learners in the pond.
Yeah, this is a pond of learning, and we are lifelong inhabitants.
And we are silly lifelong inhabitants.
Honk, honk.
Honk, honk.
Drop a silly goose emoji if you too are a lifelong silly goose learner.
So there's a distinction between the explanation for events in a fictional universe and the explanation for events in a real-life universe, or the real universe, known as the Watsonian Doyleist distinction. So this is based off of Sherlock Holmes, Watson the character versus Doyle the author. So a Watsonian explanation is an explanation that makes sense in the fictional universe, so what the characters know. We can use an example like Friends, a famous 90s TV show. Phoebe gets pregnant in some of the early series because she agrees to be a surrogate for her brother.
Which is weird.
It's a bit weird.
It's a little weird.
But it's a really nice...
It is nice. It's just like, I just think
it's odd.
There's just something about carrying your brother's child that really kind of freaks me out.
As two brother havers.
As two people who have brothers.
It's freaky. It's not that it's not freaky, but that is the explanation the characters know.
Yeah.
The Doyleist explanation is the real life explanation, what the audience knows. So for in the example of Phoebe from Friends, we know that Lisa Kudrow, the actress, got pregnant, and the show was forced to write around her pregnancy. So the character had to be pregnant regardless. They had to just come up with a reason for it. Similarly, in the Flanaverse, the ghosts are real in a Watsonian sense because they speak to the characters, they impact all the characters, and most importantly, the characters that are skeptics in the show, like Steven, Shirley,
occasionally Theo
to some extent,
get
convinced.
Yeah.
They see the ghost, they realize, no, there are ghosts. Ghosts are real. In a Doyleist sense, we can consider them to be a metaphor for grief. So as an audience, we can perceive that these actors are telling a story about grief. through the medium of ghosts.
Mhm.
But for the characters, the ghosts are dead real.
Yeah, and we know that because famously Hugh Crane of the Flanaverse never built a treehouse.
No, never built a treehouse, and Stephen was walking all around the treehouse with Luke.
Mm-hmm. And he saw the clock ghost.
Yeah. So the ghosts are for sure real. In the book, it's not 100% confirmed if the ghosts are real for the characters, real in a Watsonian sense, because they do have these two skeptic characters who come in. Well, not necessarily, they believe in ghosts, quote unquote, but they come in not being part of the gang, and they never experience anything. And of course, I'm talking about Mrs. Montague
and her quote-unquote friend.
Her quote-unquote friend, Arthur. They are like classic Ouija board, lady who wears a lot of scarves, medium type people.
Yeah, kind of a charlatan sort of character.
But they don't experience a goddamn thing.
Yeah, and it's not for want of trying, because they, Mrs. Montague, it's interesting because she's kind of a blend of sincerity and insincerity, because I think she sincerely wants to experience a haunting, a ghostly phenomenon. However, her expertise seems insincere to me. And I think that's a little bit because she's characterized as a kind of insincere person, where she's cuckolding her husband.
Yeah, she's very extravagant. She's very over the top. And we know she can lie because she's like, my friend Arthur.
Everyone's like, wow, crazy. They spend a lot of time together. Anyway, I'm sure that's nothing.
So I'm going to see my husband, and I'm just going to bring another man
that I spend a lot of time with and actually am in league with against my husband, seemingly.
Listen, if it's not a physical affair, it's emotional cheating for sure.
I think it's physical.
Yeah.
I think they fuck. Even unpleasant people fuck.
God damn it.
So sorry. Yeah, so we don't know that they're real because the people who have, quote unquote, the most ghost experience can't seem to find any sort of presence of a poltergeist or any sort of haunting in the house. The only people that are experiencing it are the people who are experiencing this weird bond, this weird trauma bond that's also very grounded in sort of hedonism.
And isolation. So when the real world in the form of a wife and the wife's affair partner intrudes upon their little paradise, that's a structure test.
Mm-hmm.
That's a test for their perception of reality, and they fail it because Mrs. Montague, despite going into the nursery where they experience as a group the most ghost activity, she doesn't get a wink.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, casts a different kind of reality to the ghosts as opposed to the show. Also, worth pointing out that the show really goes all in on classic jump scares and really goes in full color detail, shows you the scary little ghosties, whereas the book, everything kind of happens off screen or off page.
Yeah,
it's not fully sketched out for you what any of them see. They hear some banging, but they don't see who does the banging.
Mm-hmm.
They chase after this dog, but they never actually catch up to it.
Mm-hmm.
They see a ghostly apparition of a picnic, but something horrible happens in that apparition, and then they never tell the reader what exactly it was. They just
say it was awful.
Yeah. So there's also that sense of the reader as a skeptic, perhaps, who is entering into their world, cannot be convinced because they don't see anything.
Yeah. And taking note of their kind of strange bond.
Mm-hmm.
There is this kind of proclivity toward sort of mob mentality, I think, with the Scooby Gang, where they all are really willing to kind of suspend their disbelief for each other in a way that they're not even necessarily conscious of. Whereas Mrs. Montague and Arthur, because they haven't experienced this bond, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hear anything.
Yeah.
So, the haunting is very reliant on atmosphere as it's being perceived by the people who are, part of this group. Whereas there's no actual explicit evidence of ghosts outside of that experience.
For sure. So that was a brief summary. A meandering, perhaps. Brief is
I would say brief is generous there.
Listen, the magic of editing is unknown to us.
We just learned about microphones today, friends. So, we're going to learn about editing hopefully this weekend.
So we're going to move on now to discuss what actually was preserved. The first one obviously being there's a hill house and it's a bad house.
Yeah. Evil house. Both houses are set in New England. both lean heavily on the New England Gothic, as we've discussed. This idea of the empty land, quote unquote, that was relied on by colonists in order to justify the taking over of space.
A kind of isolation of a structure within a very unmanageable and hostile natural world.
So if we wanted to lean into a little bit of Northrop Frye, we could even say that it's reminiscent of the garrison mentality. So this is, getting into a little bit of Canadian literary theory, but this idea that the town can function as the garrison. So we've got, the populace, the colonial populace living within the constructs of the town or the confines of the town, which is what keeps them safe. And then the outside is always trying to tear down that protective barrier. And that the outside in this case, in the case of the colonial project, is, of course, the indigenous peoples.
I also wanted to touch back on the crazy architect Hugh, because in the novel, as we previously mentioned, Hugh Crane built the house with these wrong angles that create imbalance. And there's a slight nod to a kind of scientific explanation for their sense of unsettlement, which is just that their inner ears are off balance, and that can create a lot of distortion in their perception of the world around them.
And some distress.
And in the show, all of the angles when they film Hill House, either in the past or the present, slightly off kilter. They're not squared.
Yeah, and then we get the kind of nod to the crazy architect with Olivia's descent into madness, where, we see her drawing up the blueprints to the house, the master blueprint, where she just fills in the master blueprint with little outlines of the forever house that she's been working on, the house where she and Hugh intend to build as their final house, where they intend to stay for the rest of their lives, ostensibly.
Yeah, where they don't want to flip anymore.
Yeah, which, get out of the flipping game. Again, the moral of the story, no house flipping.
Don't flip houses. And in the show, in addition to using the off-kilter angles, Flanagan builds an atmospheric sense of unease by hiding a lot of ghosts and ghouls and little scary figures in the background of shots and in reflections where they're not immediately visible, but they're intended for your subconscious mind to pick up on and then kind of have a little bit of an unease being bred from it. I will say that there's now a very active community online of people finding and cataloging these hidden ghosts, and so they're a little bit maybe less of a embedded secret now.
Yeah.
But that's just fan interaction.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's the paratextual element of interacting with a text, is you change the meaning when you interact with it.
Yeah, so instead of it being uneasy, you just get excited because now you get to tell all your friends online that you found another one.
Yeah, although I still find it a little bit creepy.
It's definitely scary.
Yeah, it's like what ends up happening is I think about the amount of times that I've seen this show, and sometimes I still miss them. And so then it's like, oh man, they've been there this whole time and I'm not observant enough. And so I still get like, when I do watch those little videos on TikTok of like people finding the ghosts, I'm like, oh man, they've been watching me this whole time and I didn't even know. And I don't like it.
It's a very good technique for being unsettling. In terms of characterization, there are also quite a few things that are preserved. So Luke kind of being a disappointment to the family. In the original book, he's a thief and he's someone who's not really using his full potential very much. And in the show, heartbreakingly, Luke is suffering from very intense opiate addiction on account of all the horrors that he perceived throughout his childhood and the horror of losing his mother at a very young age. But they maintain that sense of the other characters, or Luke's family is a little bit sick of Luke in some ways.
Yeah, there's a lot of judgment. And it's like, you kind of get to this point where you can see that the family has been trying to support Luke through his addiction for so long, but at a certain point, it does become more harmful to the people that care about the person with the addiction. So you can kind of see everyone wrestling with that, where, they kind of have gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I'm out thousands of dollars. I don't want to watch my brother die. So it becomes easier to push him away, which is really sad because he does, in the show, you can see that he does really want his family's approval and love, and his addiction really hinders that. And it gets to the point where even when he's doing really well,
they can't trust and believe that it will last. And I think that the show is a very faithful, well, not faithful necessarily because everyone's experience of addiction is different, but it's a very tender portrayal of the uncomfortable realities of the disease called addiction, where it is not necessarily a person's goal to do things that harm others, and yet the harm continues. And it falls on a person trying to get well to reckon with those harms and to try and make a life for themselves past that. Not to blame themselves endlessly, but also not to ignore and push under the rug what happened. And in some ways, the idea of addiction can be extrapolated to the whole show, where they are struggling with whether or not they need to understand, look into, and acknowledge the hurts of Hill House, or if they should just use their various methods of dealing with it.
Their various coping mechanisms.
Yeah, so for instance, Shirley copes by being a good control freak. Stephen copes by desperately trying to understand the supernatural.
And also at the same time, deeply skeptical of its existence at all.
Yeah, but he's really trying to convince himself it's real. Which is a heartbreaking part because all his siblings are like, you don't even believe in it. And they don't actually realize how much his career is based on him trying to believe in it. Luke has the drugs. Theo has also being very icy and cold to others.
And also alcohol. She does,
alcohol, her own drug of choice.
Yeah.
Which is less critiqued because it's less stigmatized. And poor Nell has falling to pieces.
Yeah. She has the support of family until she's married, and then it's almost like everyone's like, oh, you're not our problem anymore. And then afterwards, like after her husband dies, it's like they don't know how to pick her back up again.
Yeah. And Nell is obviously the main thing that remains unchanged is, she dies. And Flanagan puts that right up front and center, to me, kind of as a nod to readers of the original novel, for whom Nell's death might be the climax. It's like, when I'm adapting a text, I can't really keep these plot secrets, so I'm just going to put it front and center. First thing that happens, Nell dies.
Yeah, first episode.
Everyone already knows that Nell dies.
Yeah, but it's interesting because the novel version of Nell is sort of split between Olivia and Flanahouse Nell, because we get the instability of Nell and the suicide and the fracturing of her psyche, but with Olivia, we get the rocks raining down on the house, which is the entire reason that Dr. Montague invites the novel version of Nell to the house, is because of this incident where rocks fell on her house. So he believes strongly that she is sensitive to the supernatural. And Olivia has this experience where rocks rain down on her house because she's so sad about her father dying, and she doesn't know what to do with that grief, and she believes that she made it rain rocks. We also get the monologue where Olivia talks about how she wanted to live in the house with the rose garden, and that's the same internal monologue that Nell from the novel has when she's driving to Hill House for the first time, where she passes this house with the lions in front of the gate, and she makes up this kind of alternate life where she lives like as a kind of recluse there.
Yes. Both times when Olivia kind of inhabits book Nell, it draws directly from Jackson's text.
Whereas show Nell doesn't, there's not really a one-to-one with show Nell and Jackson's version of Nell, other than the suicide or the ostensible suicide.
Yeah, and even that is not under the same circumstances.
No.
And there's a whole different mythos around it, because one of the climaxes or the actual surprising parts of the show is in the episode where we find out that the bent neck lady, which is a ghost that has been haunting Nell from the beginning, is actually herself post-suicide, in which Nell's kind of tricked by the house into hanging herself, and then she falls through her own life and views all the incidents where she was spooked by the bent neck lady as a child from the perspective of the bent neck lady. And that kind of circularity, or coming back to the beginning to understand Nell's fate, doesn't happen in the book, because in the book, Nell disbands the group, and in the show, her death actually brings the family back together again.
Yeah.
And forces them to actually confront their issues, communicate about their problems with each other, and even go back to Hill House and deal with the death of their mother.
Mm-hmm.
All of those hidden issues get brought back to the forefront by the pressure of Nell dying, as unspeakably tragic as it is.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, the Jackson version of Nell sort of acknowledges her own agency at the very end, where she's driving towards the tree and she's got her foot on the gas and she's flooring it and she's, about to end her life. And she has this moment where she goes, "Why isn't anyone stopping me?" And it's like she recognizes now that she's the one doing it and she's wanting someone to reach out and stop her. She's saying, like, why is no one stopping me instead of no one stopping this? So it's like she's recognizing her own agency in this.
And we've talked a little bit about the idea of the modern versus the archaic, the influence of the changing role of women. And one thing that is not so much, it stays the same, but it's amplified, is a queer reading of Theo. Whereas there's a lot of queer subtext in Theo's story in the book, it becomes text in the Flanaverse because she's explicitly shown having lots of sex with women.
Yes.
And really hard to
read that as anything but queer.
Yeah, read that as anything.
Yeah, but, you're like, man, maybe they're just really good friends who like to kiss and also like to be in bed naked together. Anyway,
like Mrs. Montague and Arthur.
Really good friends. Just really good friends.
Pals.
Just pals.
So, but in the novel Theo, who you described as a beautiful bohemian artist in Context Corner, is kind of a more progressive figure than Nell, or at least one that seems to anticipate the countercultural movement of the 60s. She's heavily involved in art. She likes to dress with lots of color. She doesn't live with a man. She doesn't even use a last name, so she kind of has no connection at all to men, really.
She's just Theodora.
She picks up and moves whenever the hell she wants to. She wears pants all the time. And Nell, on the other hand, is so attracted by that, but unable to replicate it. She wears a red sweater and she's so self-conscious about it kind of the whole time. She's like, oh my God, I'm wearing a red sweater and I'm wearing red shoes. Like, that's actually crazy for me to do it. Whereas Theo does it very effortlessly.
Yeah. And then when Theo has to wear Nell's clothes, Nell starts to hate Theo, where it's almost like she sees Theo as being able to seamlessly make her drab wardrobe cool and exciting and, not avant-garde necessarily, but at the very least have some personality. And Nell herself is unable to do that.
She is unable to do that. And part of the reason, part of this kind of garrison mentality, colonial, overcast, New England Gothic theme that we've been discussing is the idea that the house is hostile to newcomers and to those people who want to leave it. So it's hostile to change in general. And that is a colonist's worst fear, because they are coming in solely to change, manipulate, and to take advantage of. And so the idea that a place could defend itself against newcomers is deeply frightening to a colonial imagination.
It's also the idea of implanting your own historicity into a place. So it's like both the idea of changing a place, but also ingraining in the mentality of the people who live there that this has always been here. So the idea that Hill House has been standing for, in the novel 80 years and then in the show 100 years. It's like the house it's almost like it was not even built. It's just always been there. And
there's that passage in the novel that's repeated in the show where Hill House is not so much built as it came together under its own malevolent will in the hands of its builders. The builders just wanted to get at it. Like, they were just a tool for the house to create itself, which is a very important part of the colonial project, which is that this whole thing just kind of happened.
It just happened. We were already here. We've been here.
Crazy.
That's why there are so many colonial ghost stories. It's like if you have ghosts in a place, then that means that you have a history there.
And the house is a peak idea of that, because it's a haunted piece of 19th century or early 20th century.
Yeah.
But an earlier time period, they were already there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
now they're left over and they're kind of coming to get us. But like, thank God, because they were already there.
Mm-hmm.
And, there is kind of this other side part, which is about much like the 90s, a side part.
Oh. No, did they do a side? Yes, they did do like a deep side part. And then,
Yeah.
yeah.
With like a lot of volume.
Yes. I mean, good hair. 90s had good hair.
It's a look I can never replicate. I've tried many a time.
Me neither. It's because my hair's so fine. It just falls so limp.
It's because my hair is so coarse. It doesn't want to do anything that it doesn't want to do.
And we are alike and different in our struggles.
But in the 50s, they have a sense of American post-war anxiety
Mhm.
where they have won World War II. They're they're fighting with the USSR for the status of political superpower.
Mhm.
They are
Got the arms race.
They're the arms race, but they're also 100% superseding Britain. Britain is now fading and America is ascendant and really needing to prove that they are taking the place, right?
Mhm.
So the ghosts come from a faded British European era, and the modern people coming in are bright young modern people. And their house really resists the Scooby Gang trying to move the furniture around and open and close all the doors
Mhm.
and things like that. So there's this idea that in becoming new and shiny post-war, are we going too far? Are we abandoning the traditional wantonly? And that really comes to a head with the 60s countercultural movement,
Yeah.
where everyone was so panicked about young people coming into traditional spaces and
disbanding them.
them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of reflected to me in the 90s family nostalgia that we're facing now as a society. Like in the 90s, no one was on their phone. We all just played outside, and mommy and daddy just like...
We used the porch light to get us home.
Yeah.
Hill House reference.
Hill House reference. The idea that we were just purebred, free-range children roaming about, and family was stronger, that it wasn't being dismantled by things like gays and phones.
And those are the same things. My phone is so gay.
But Olivia's fears around the children growing up and leaving her motherly embrace is also, a fear of the perfect nuclear family disintegrating that is imposed on her by the house. Because she was actually quite modern originally, quote unquote, right? Like we get this little episode where the Dudleys, as a last bastion of old ideals, they worked for the Hills, they represent continuity, they're very deeply religious, tries to convert Steve, basically. It's a little bit manipulative where she tries to get Steve alone, and she's like,
yeah, do you know the Gospels, young man?
Yeah, like it's a little bit manipulative, and Olivia comes in and kind of goes, no, don't do that to my child, in a very respectful way. But she comes in and she says, Steve knows the Gospels, he knows all these other religious texts, because we want him to be prepared for the world. We want him to go out there and know what's out there.
And then at the end, closer to the end too, when we see Olivia really fraying, she has this conversation with Clara Dudley where she goes, I've always believed that it was my job to get my kids ready for the outside world, but now all I want to do is keep them close.
And Clara's like, you do it, girl.
Yeah, Clara's like, listen, I support Olivia rights and Olivia wrongs. And
you keep those kids close.
And she also is like, she's like, I believe in Olivia wrongs mostly.
So that idea is that she backslides from being a woman to whom motherhood was but a facet of identity, an important one. She loves being a mother, but motherhood is enhanced by her having a career. It's enhanced by her and Hugh having a loving relationship as spouses. It's enhanced by her having family.
Yeah, and being a bit of a free spirit. I mean, she calls herself the kite and he's the line. And like she always says that she needs the line to stay grounded and he needs the kite to stay free. Whimsical.
Yeah.
To give into a little whimsy.
Yeah. And Olivia's like, oh my gosh, we'll never get, even before the 90s are over, she's like, I know what's happening. I can use this phone.
Yeah, she's like, no one's going to look for my porch light anymore. I'm going to have to text them.
I can't do this. What's Find My Friends?
Location sharing on all times.
And this family unit-based anxiety is also reflected in both texts and is a shared kind of concern of both texts, because there's this sense of the failure of patriarchal figures and the failure of patriarchal society.
Mhm.
You know, Hugh Crane was insane, a terrible father who doomed his children. Dr. Montague is a cock.
Yeah, he's a, like what we would understand, what maybe the manosphere would call a beta.
And then he gets cucked by an alpha male in Arthur.
Blech.
A mean principal of a school for boys who indoctrinates his students
Mhm.
with this male patriarchal manosphere concept.
Yeah.
Not that
Ew.
the manosphere existed then, but or maybe the
the
manosphere was the whole.
protosphere, the proto manosphere.
Maybe the manosphere was everywhere because it was the 50s.
Oh no.
Oh.
Yeah.
The manosphere was just the dominant sphere.
I don't like it.
And, you know, in the show, New Hugh really has trouble. He's a fix-it guy, but he has trouble fixing his wife. He can't fix his wife. And Stephen, famously, he gets fixed. And he has a vasectomy. And he refuses to embody the patriarchal figure. You know, Shirley's always on his ass for not being enough of a dad to them, which is a bit of a Shirley wrong.
That is Shirley has lots of wrongs, and I'm not afraid to admit it.
And maybe the cucking kind of comes into play with Shirley's adultery plotline against Kevin, who is perfect.
Yeah, Kevin has the only person in this entire story who's never done a thing wrong.
Also, new Arthur, Nell's husband in the show. Honestly, the two spouses in the show never did anything wrong.
Perfect humans.
Perfect humans. Lee also didn't really do anything wrong.
No, she definitely didn't do anything wrong. I think she was having a valid reaction. She was doing her best.
But she definitely wasn't portrayed as like this overwhelming bastion of perfectness, which maybe is a Flanagan portraying women issue.
Yeah.
Because the two sweetie pie perfects are both men.
I mean,
but they are sweetie pie.
They're sweetie pie perfect, and we can't argue with that is the thing. And like, I think that Lee is often read as being unreasonable.
But she's not. She's totally right.
She's totally right. It's like she's just having an honest reaction to like something that has taken her completely by surprise.
A huge betrayal, which is Steve hiding the fact that he's had a vasectomy while they actively try for children. And she kind of goes further and further into a space of worry and anxiety about why she can't get pregnant.
Yeah, she thinks that she is failing in terms of the ideal of womanhood, quote unquote. I mean, that doesn't mean anything, but like,
it means something to her.
It means something to her, and it means something to society. But obviously, womanhood is not limited to being able to conceive a child in a uterus.
We know that.
But
Lee does
not know that.
Yeah.
And she blames herself for not being able to do it when the whole time Steve is the one who can't do it. Yeah. And he knows that.
So, and that's a terrible thing to do. But Lee's also desperate desire to be a mother, to me, even though this is not explicit in the text, triggers Steve, I believe. I definitely think he's haunted by this, seeing his mother become deranged in the desire to protect the babies and lack of desire to protect him.
Yeah, and he experiences some of her episodes at an age where he would remember them.
At an age where he would remember them and maybe blame himself. Like
yeah.
When he worked really hard to make the vanity mirror for his mother, and she sees a hallucination of Nell and Luke as older dead people and punches the mirror with no explanation. It's heartbreaking for him because all he sees is how she's desperately trying to hang on to the twins and has already written off him, Shirley, and Theo.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that her two young, and we see that in like the locket too, and like her two youngest are her like her special darlings. Babies, and her older ones are she's kind of already let them go.
Yeah, and on one hand, that makes them more functional as adults because they're the only ones who actually had Hugh and Olivia's non-Hill House parenting.
Yeah,
and so they're the ones who are able to hold down careers and able to have relationships with others and so on and so forth. And Nell is able to have a relationship with Arthur, and that would have been a very good one if it hadn't been tragically cut short.
Yeah,
but she was also entirely dependent on him.
Yeah,
they're like, we're gonna move to California for Arthur's job, but there's no mention of what Nell does.
Yeah, and her mental health is completely dependent on him loving her. I mean, Arthur is a perfect darling. However, the fact that she's so reliant on him to be well mentally is, it is still saying something about her.
Her own ability to cope as an adult.
Yeah.
Like both her and Luke never progressed beyond being babies because Olivia made them that way.
Yeah.
And I think Steve seeing the thing that finally prompts him to talk to Lee is seeing his mother literally terrifyingly hang in the window of the IVF doctor's exam room. And he can't go on past that. But that specter of the mother that consumes the monster's mother definitely is part of the reason why Steve is reluctant to have children. But he can't face that, and instead he mucks it up by lying to his wife and making everything worse.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we should probably turn it over to our second to last segment, which is where we consider the goal of the adaptation. So, in general, what do we think is the goal?
Well, I think it's to make Sid cry about dads.
And it does that. It does that super effectively every single time. Hugh turns from old to young, and I just weep. I just weep.
And I also think it's about house flipping being bad.
Yep.
And I think it's about giving Mike Flanagan's wife an acting job.
Any job besides just being beautiful, and which she is obviously the most accomplished, most valuable employee of all time at being beautiful.
Yeah, she's employee of the month every month at Being Beautiful Inc.
And she's also very good at acting.
It's just,
she's in all of his movies, and I'm like, at this point, he's her employer and her spouse.
Yeah, she is definitely making it a priority to work with him.
Which we love. We love it.
And he's making it a priority to work with her, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, I think that part of the goal of this adaptation is also changing the reputation of the horror genre from the kind of like teen slasher, B horror movies that really dominated our youth to one that really gains a lot of legitimacy by leaning on a classic text and by adapting a classic text and using these deep themes of grief and suffering and loss rather than like, wouldn't it be crazy if you were a virgin?
And then you had sex, and then there was a serial killer, and then you died. Yeah, I think it's the reputation of the horror genre is like the last, I would say, decade has been, really about shifting towards these more psychological themes rather than these kind of leaning too heavily on the paranormal as the major influence. I mean, it's like the paranormal is the catalyst for a lot of the themes, but the driving force is always the psychological element. So we see that very much at play in the Flana house. We also see on a metafictional level the novel haunting the TV show.
Yeah, the TV show snips and changes the context of the dialogue. And in fact, the book dialogue only comes out in the show in the spookiest moments, like when Theo is in her Red Room hallucination, in which Trish is also there, and Trish is crazy, but that's another point. Trish is crazy in a different way, crazy down bad.
Yeah, and we've all been down bad, and we've all been down bad for Kate Siegel, so it's like, I get it.
But never been so down bad that I show up to... She crashed a funeral to hang out with a girl that she had a crush on. And then expecting her to be nice to you after you show up. Someone who you already know, you've slept with her twice, all you know about her is that she's not good at intimacy, and you're like, the way to her heart, showing up unexpected when she's at her most vulnerable.
And I'm not saying Trish is good at reading people.
Incredible violation of boundaries.
Yeah.
Like, on one hand, we have Theo putting up toxic boundaries, too many boundaries. Not every boundary is valid, right? But on the other hand, we have Trish completely disregarding any sense of propriety, any sense of personal space, just being like, I'm so down tremendous.
Yeah, down tremendous to the point where I'm going to make it your problem. And that's
kind of stalking.
I was going to say, that's, I think, what we call stalking.
It's like, I saw the obituary in the paper, so I'm going to show up in a short black mini dress and sky-high heels. It's her sister's funeral.
Yeah, her younger sister.
She's not trying to get some.
Yeah. And Trish just looks hot and doesn't try anything, but at the same time, I'm like, as someone who bought really high heels for my own grandmother's funeral, grief makes you do crazy things, but Trish is not the one grieving.
No, Trish is grieving the fact that Theo is not her girlfriend.
Yeah.
And that's a very different grief than I've just lost another member of my family in the most tragic circumstances
In the
possible.
same house.
Like, that's, yeah. Anyway, let me just turn that back around to my original point, which was that in Theo's Red Room hallucination, she uses the novel dialogue about throwing the rock through the glass of the greenhouse, and that's how you can tell that this whole scene isn't real, because it's so different from her normal vernacular. The novel dialogue has that dated 50s essence to it, and that's how you can kind of tell that the Red Room is uncanny. It doesn't match with the rest of the show in any way. And it's the same as when Olivia uses the novel dialogue when she's the most insane. Stephen uses it as a kind of frame narrator, not as Stephen himself. And so in all the uncanny moments, in the moments where reality shifts a little bit in the show, the novel dialogue comes out. And so it's kind of on a metafictional level, the gothic old novel is haunting the new media property. And I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so this brings us to what I would call the silliest segment of our show, which is the honk ratings.
Trademark not actually pending. That's actually just a bit. But also, don't steal our stuff.
Don't steal our stuff. We're just two little guys. Two little geese, in fact. So don't steal it. Okay, so yeah, basically the way that we do this is we formally rate each text out of 10 honks, because that's what geese say, honk. We Googled it. Mm-hmm. The first ranking will be for the original text. The second will be for the adaptation by itself as a standalone work, so not related to the original text. And then the third will be for the adaptation as it relates to the original work.
So let's get started with Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Sid, would you want to take it away?
Would love to. I gave it an 8 out of 10 honks. That's just because really my only kind of gripe with it, and this is, such a personal gripe. It's not for me personally. The way that the characters are written, because the prose is so tight and so sparse, the way that the characters are developed gives us very little insight to their actual personalities outside of their archetypes. So I find it hard to connect with the characters beyond kind of just what's happening in the novel. That being said, the spareness of the prose is beautiful. It really makes the tension jump out of the page. And I also think that the lack of explicit ghosts in the novel is a really effective tool in creating that sense of dread.
Yeah, I think I would really agree with you on a lot of those points. And the honk ratings are meant to be like personal take, not so much an objective evaluation on items, because as the famous saying goes, every cloud has a silver lining, but it can also rain on you. A thing that is a positive for one person can be a negative for another. With that being said, I actually ended up rating it an 8.5 because it was my first horror novel I ever read, and I read the whole thing, and I'm really proud of myself. So it gets an extra 0.5 because I really have nothing to compare it to in terms of horror novels. It was my first foray into the genre. I found the atmosphere really, really excellent. There's a strong balance of spooks to emotion. I will say that we really were ensconced in Nell's world, and most of what we saw of the world around her was from Nell's kind of warped perspective, and that is a really thematic choice. But to me, I also did kind of wonder a little bit about the other characters and what was going on for them and how they were experiencing the house. But again, that's a personal rather than an objective evaluation. My final point is that the cover of the edition that we got was terrifying. This is not related to the book at all, but it has to be said. The drawing of Nell on the front cover is the most haunting image. And in order to read the book, I actually had to put a little sticker, a sparkly sticker that had a little bunny on it, over the figure of Nell because it was that scary. So would not recommend.
Yeah, and as I remember, the sticker kept peeling itself off, like it also didn't want to be there. So
Yep. So we won't name the edition for, legal reasons, but just know that there's one out there that's really fucking cursed looking.
You'll know when you see it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
So should we move on to the Flanahouse as a solo property?
Yes, absolutely. I gave it a 7.
Mm-hmm.
I gave it a 7 as a standalone because I do think that the original text, the connection that it has to the original text is what gives it its strength, which I will talk about further when we get to the Flanahouse as adaptation. I also think that Mike Flanagan is very heavy-handed in his metaphors. He really, he wants to make sure you get it. So he really makes sure that it can't be missed. And I think that it lacks a little bit of subtlety when it comes to the themes that he's working with. We know it's about grief from the first episode, and he doesn't let you forget it. And I don't think you would forget it even if we left some of the more obvious choices out. And then also I think that there's a lack of satisfying resolution with both the relationships and the getting out of the red room. The red room ending is a little bit, it's sort of Deus ex machina in that like they're just kind of absolved by Nell as a ghost, and then there's not really any sort of like, it feels like the stakes lessen almost immediately. And then I also think that the Crane siblings, especially the ones that treated their spouses poorly or their respective partners poorly, we don't see any sort of growth in that regard on the screen. We just kind of see them realize it, and then we see them in a happy ending, but we don't really get that sort of satisfying turn of events where they actually kind of talk things out. So it just feels rushed to me. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, okay. I, again, kind of on a very similar foot here, gave it a 7 with an extra 0.5 for being my first ever horror TV show. And so, again, I have really nothing to compare it to. But I am really proud of myself for watching it all the way through. I did feel that the jump scares were tastefully used. I have a really strong personal connection to Shirley, a woman who needs control so bad that it makes her insane. And I actually, used the scene where Shirley is yelling at Steve over the phone while she's preserving Nell's corpse as a keystone comparison in therapy at one point. So honestly, the show has had a big impact on me. My biggest gripe, and this is a pretty big gripe, I would say, is the casting of actors of color in the show is exclusively relegated to these very one-dimensional roles that just serve to drive the main Crane siblings' character development, and they don't feel rounded in any way. Again, kind of same thing with what you talked about with regards to the siblings treating their spouses and partners very poorly. Many of those spouses and partners were people of color, and they were treated really poorly, and then kind of just all came back together, happy ending right at the very end. And I do think that if it was a one-off, one character, it wouldn't be a big deal to me, or it wouldn't ping as something wrong. But the fact that it was pretty widespread across all the casting of actors of color, I did wonder at that, and I did kind of wish that we would have had a more thoughtful treatment of the race relations in the show.
Yeah, absolutely.
So our final category is the Flanahouse as an adaptation. So Sid?
I gave it an 8.5. I personally think that the interpretation of the original text being more of a translation than a one-to-one adaptation gives the adaptation a lot of texture. And I think that it's very clear that Flanagan is very knowledgeable about the original text. It really shows through that he knows it very intimately. Occasionally, I did find the use of the prose from Jackson to be a little jarring. And I think sometimes it was just like, I felt like he was using it in a way that, and Mike Flanagan loves a monologue. So, sometimes it was just like, he would just let it go on and on. I felt like that was just like, sometimes it was a little bit much. But I do think that his knowledge of the text and its themes really shone through. And so I think its strength is in its adaptation rather than as a standalone piece.
I think I would 100% agree with you on that. And I rated it exactly the same, 8.5 out of 10 honks. I especially loved the choice to adapt the characters into siblings because I think it made all of the emotional relationships between the characters so much more salient. The addition of a couple other characters as well, like rounding out the cast and making it kind of less claustrophobic was also, I think, necessary because it expanded the length so much. The show did. So I think the choices that were made that were deferring were all thoughtfully made and made with purpose. And so I think it was overall a very, very strong adaptation. I do think the choice at the end, the revision of whatever walks in Hill House walks alone to whatever walks in Hill House walks together, did kind of, to me, it doesn't really seem to adequately deal with how horrible of a purgatory it would actually be to be stuck in that house forever. And the way that it's framed seems almost as like a positive resolution in that Hugh and Olivia get to be back together after being separated for so long, and Nell is back with her parents and she's a little baby again. But that kind of seems to go against the other themes developing on the show regarding the value of letting things go, the value of grieving fully and completely and moving beyond the various stages of grief. So I do find that revision maybe at the end wasn't, to me, the strongest choice, but overall, really great work. And so I think we can conclusively conclude, as an official was a good opinion, that it was in fact good.
I think it was good, personally. Yeah. I will give it a stamp of approval in the good category. Okay, that brings us to the end of our show. Thanks for splashing around in the pond with us today.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at wasitgood.pod and to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts.
If you could leave us a review, that would also be super helpful, and we would really appreciate it.
Until next time, stay silly, and we'll see you back in the pond soon.